I'm Kaisa Johnson from Artists for Democracy. Welcome to our third talk in our Artists for Democracy Artist Talk series. We are so excited to have Kandis Williams here with us today. The most important action you can take right now is to get ready to vote. You need to make sure you are registered, make a voting plan, and vote as early as you can in your state. We have a voter resources page on our website, and you can find it in the chat and look for more information. I want to give you a quick update on some things we've been working on. When you registered for the talks, we asked what issues were important to you. Based on your answers, we are creating issues pages on our website, which give you policy outlines from both presidential candidates, as well as links to organizations that work on those issues. The link is in the chat. We have the environment and healthcare COVID-19 pages up so far, and we are working on the rest, and they should be up shortly, so please check back in. Next, we're going to hear from Sarana, who will give you an update on what you can find on social media, how you can help us with content, and some collaborations that we have going on. Then we have A4D member Bronwyn Malden, who will give you a quick view of part of her zine series that is about civic engagement. That is also available to view and download on our website. Link will be in the chat again. And then the best part, A4D member Melissa Passman will introduce you to Kandis, who will talk about her work. And if you have any questions for Kandis, please enter them in the chat, and she can answer them at the end when she is in conversation with Melissa. Then to close out, Deborah is going to give you a few quick voting tips before we can all tune into the debate tonight. So take it away, Sarana.
Hi, everyone. So happy that you're here with us. Kaisa already mentioned that we've been building the website to basically be a database for artists and educators. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Instagram, because we've done that with Instagram. We've basically made it into a database for to get people information, where to protest, where to organize, to vote. Obviously, right now we're really concentrating on the voting side. And if you want, I mentioned this last week. I don't know if you were here, but we're collecting little films, like little. We call them POVs. They're protest organized vote videos that you take with your iPhone or your cell phone, and you just tell us why you vote, and we'll post it on our Instagram. It's a really nice way of showing community that it's really important to be voting right now. So you can send that to us at info@artistsfordemocracy.com. And then this Thursday, Artists for Democracy will be teaming up with Advice, which is a group similar to us, which is filled with artists and educators, but they're on the East Coast, and they're from schools like Yale, RISD, SUNY, Pratt. And this Thursday, a couple of the members from A4D will be talking with Pratt. They're doing like a virtual Get Out the Vote called Vote, Vote, and Vote Again, and it's called Art in Action. And Artists for Democracy will be talking about how we have used postcards in the past, and actually currently, as a creative way contact voters and also contact your representatives. So if you want any of that information, it's going to be in there's going to be a link in the chat. And I'm now going to hand you off to Bronwyn, who will talk to us about her amazing zines. Take it away, Bronwyn.
Right, thank you, Sarana. And I've got a wacky Zoom screen going on here, but don't look at me, look at this. This is way more interesting. You guys, ever since about November of 2016, I've been doing a whole series of zines that are all about, they're basically like a toolkit guide to how to do democracy. So we've got zines about how to recognize voter suppression, how to protest, how to testify in front of a government body, and the one I'm going to show you really quickly here, which is why we vote. And this is kind of a guide for how to vote and why to do it. And I'm going to run through it really quickly. It is on our A4D website. You can download it, you can print it, you can email it, you can share it with anyone you want. We want these zines, we want the information to get out to all of you and the folks who need it. But as I run through this, there are 3 things that I want you to mostly remember from this zine. And the first one is, your vote makes a difference. Literally, there have been elections where there was a tie, and the final outcome of the election was decided by tossing a coin. If one more person showed up for that election, that person's candidate would have won. You want to be that person. That's more common at a local level. At a national level, you'll often see races where it's so close that they have to do a recount. If you and 5 of your friends had shown up, they might have avoided the recount because your candidate would have been way ahead. So your vote really does make a difference. The second thing I want you to keep in mind, I want you to do, is you got to make a plan for how you're going to vote. Do it now, because you don't want to end up on election day going, oh, wait, the polling place is over there. Oh, I didn't take time off. Oh, I got a class to get to. So know where you're going to vote, when you're going to vote, and how you're going to vote. There are a lot more options this year than ever before. Many more places have vote by mail. Many more places have early voting. Or if you're going to show up and vote on the day, just plan ahead for it so that you can get there and cast your ballot. And the last thing I want you to remember is that there are no perfect candidates for any office. And it's because there are no perfect human beings in the world, but it's also because there is no one in the world, there is no candidate running for public office that thinks exactly the way you do. So pick the best candidate and get out there and vote. And when they're elected, hold them accountable to what you believe should happen. And we have all the tools of democracy available for holding them accountable. So make a plan, get out there, and vote. And with that, I'm going to hand things off to my colleague, Melissa.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I could not be more excited to introduce Kandis Williams. And I just wanted to give you a brief introduction for Kandis. So Kandis was born in Baltimore and is currently based in LA. She spent over 10 years in Berlin. She studied at the Cooper Union School of Art, and her practice spans collage, performance, writing, publishing, and curating. And she often explores and deconstructs critical theory around race, nationalism, authority, and eroticism. She's represented by Night Gallery in Los Angeles and has an active pedagogical practice as well, running Cassandra Press, which she co-founded in 2016. Cassandra Press produces lo-fi activist and academic readers, flyers, posters, and pamphlets, and she is currently a visiting faculty member at Cal Arts. And she has 2 upcoming exhibitions this fall. So first, at the Institute for Contemporary Art at Virginia Commonwealth University, VCU will open Kandis Williams A Field, which is a multi-stage solo exhibition curated by Amber Esteva, highlighting all aspects of Kandis's practice, and that will run through summer 2021. Otherwise, she's also going to be a part of Made in LA, and her work will be included at the Hammer and also at the Huntington Library. The exhibition is organized by Miriam Ben-Sala and Lauren Mackler, and I believe it is now scheduled to open around November 15th. And with that, I'll take it away for what everybody is here for. Here's Kandis Williams.
Hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. Am I echoing or anything? Yeah, so I don't have a lot necessarily prepared. I'm seeing a lot of students and stuff in the audience, and I would really like to get questions from people primarily. I think I can sort of just talk a little bit about the 2 upcoming projects that Melissa mentioned. So my work is going to be shown. I have 4 large collage works that are going to be shown at Made in LA 2020. It's called Aversion. So some of those themes the themes of the Made in LA show really intersect with a lot of my overall work. The themes this year, I think, invoke sort of horror and the fourth wall. I also co-found Cassandra Press. So the classroom that I'm teaching right now and the classes that we've started and opened up center Black pedagogists and Black teachers and scholars. And we're just sort of bringing together classes based on our individual interests and sort of responding to the urgency of, the urgency of public conversations happening right now. The other exhibition for VCU, curated by Ambrose Siva, who's also doing kind of concurrent research, really bleeds into the Made in LA work in a large way, thinking a lot about botany and forced migration and sort of like the differentiation between life and non-life and how sort of categorically life is understood, represented, preserved, maintained, and thinking about the life of the plant and sort of bloodless dissection, bloodless beings, sentient beings, and how they are also forced to migrate, and sort of thinking about human migration, plant migration, and the sort of weaving of those almost choreographic cultivars, versions of humanity, versions of sort of like the correlational understanding of people and place, and thinking about agriculture, finance, convict leasing, for instance, in VCU, and with the Huntington Garden, thinking a lot about botanical gardens in general and sort of like ownership of the beautiful or the natural world, and how that they're sort of grafted hand in hand upon like colonial extraction practices, and just sort of also thinking a lot about climate and thinking through Darla McGann's ecofeminism article too, and thinking about Black women and the position of Black bodies and field laborers in terms of being forced to exploit land for the capital gains of others, and sort of that both fascination and, not fascination on that side, but, the kind of dual-edged sword of being able to touch life, hold life, contain life, and reproduce life. So also thinking about sort of visual regimes of classification and categorization. The works look at specific plants like rubber, latex, and how they've migrated through the Western world, thinking about philosophers or theoreticians like Lisa Rose, The Intimacy of Four Continents. So how sort of like, especially colonial regimes, implant and use racial constructs similarly to the way that they categorize types of plants and their forms of cultivation. Also thinking straight through American Reconstruction and the cotton plant, the tobacco plant, the sugar plant, and where and how, I guess, slave and slave to migrant worker communities are formed around these places. So we're looking at, for VCU, at the tango actually, and thinking about how the tango, also is sort of essentially a dance of tobacco farmers. So from African tobacco farmers who were pre the African genocide in Argentina in the 1840s, also creating this dance and creating the steps around these dances, and then how that dance gets grafted and sort of layered and appropriated by Italian, Sicilian, and Calabrian immigrants who are also tobacco farmers who dance a dance called the Tarantella in the 1900s after that genocide. So this sort of hybrid body that is also forced through various sort of forms of categorization, representation, indexes to sort of explain their position, thinking about things like Wunderkammers and how taste and beauty and order are all sort of like stratified around very changing ideals. Sort of every period or evolution of colonialism to white supremacy, or let's say from like, Roman Catholic theocratic oppression to the contemporary kind of white supremacists that we see, white supremacist colonial ecological hegemony that we see today. And especially the sort of American industrial, like Anglo-American, especially industrial empire, and how that's hinged on this complete control and utilization and exploitation of sort of like all of the elements of the natural world. So I guess, given that, I'm probably a bad person to talk to about voting because a lot of this research is very
the response was very similar to what Andrea just said. And I love the way she put it. She said, this is a moment for white people like herself, she included herself, to do fear.
Was that a question? Was that a question? Okay. Yeah, okay, so yeah, thinking, I don't know, what was that? Was that someone who wasn't muted, maybe? Okay. Well, it was a good like soundbite, because like I think that's all I kind of have to zero in on about voting, is that I feel like it's very important for white people, and for white people who are people who feel that they are, you know, the capital monetary property descendants and inheritors of the current regime that we have, the sort of democratic regime that we have. I think for white people, and for property owning white people, especially in this country, you know, the reason that we're here is because Donald Trump was elected by a white supremacist culture, you know, and that it is really important for, like, you know, I think for a lot of white bodies to put a lot of work into, you know, reversing a lot of the voter suppression, not even reversing, but repair and reparation for, I mean, voter suppression that's been happening since the 1860s. I think Frederick Douglass, there's the Morning Star is like recording voter suppression and attempts at voter suppression rights, and how sort of like white supremacists or white abolitionists, feminists, and white suffragettes are even, like, you know, being swayed to also intimidate Black voters and non-white voters throughout the late 1800s. Things like, you know, the Phyllis Wheatley Club started in Buffalo, New York in 1905, of groups of Black women who do community work and who do, we're doing community work and especially voters' rights work. I think we're very important around Reconstruction, and I do think that work is, and was, you know, 100 years of very, very important work, from the poll, you know, thinking through things like poll tax, literacy taxes, all the way to now, like different, the ID, 3 kinds of ID, new voter intimidation rights. Voter intimidation is just like extremely successful in this country. And so the 1960s and this moment of like civil rights protest that we understand, I think, in terms of representation to be extremely, or that we just know that we're saturated by, you know, like we're constantly looking at images of Selma, constantly looking at images of Montgomery. The Voters' Rights Act was very, you know, pivotal, and that was the work of a lot of people who I think, I forget who this quote is from, but, you know, like civil rights activists who were, quote, willing to die, right? Willing to die for this right. And I think we have a twofold responsibility right now as inheritors of not just a white supremacist, racist, industrial Anglo empire, but also of, you know, descendants of people from marginal communities, hundreds of years now in existence, especially in this country, who've been willing to die for this civic accomplishment of being able to vote. And I think that we have the responsibility then to be nuanced in how we respond to the kind of like gaslighting of this current moment and this current, you know, democratic election, right? Like, I don't think anyone should be willing to die anymore for this right. I think that is a kind of glamorization of the reform that we should give respect to, but that we should also sort of understand that this type of voter intimidation and, you know, the Voters' Rights Act and how it's been sort of like chipped at over the course of the last 40 years by different white supremacist legislation is also a place where we can put work and energy into reform. Yeah, I think there's a sort of will to be governed by binaries. And I just, yeah, I feel as a culture, as an American culture right now, that yeah, the court of public opinion is loud, and I do think that we have a responsibility to sort of understanding certain aspects of ourselves and our subjectivities as like positioned in a history of both white supremacist legislation and just violent voter supremacist tactics, and a responsibility to, you know, local, familial, even, you know, local religious sort of leadership that has been protecting people from that this fascist storm, you know, for years. for decades, for centuries, let's say, a couple. So thinking about sort of the plantation bloc and how to reform essentially a one-party system. I don't know if vote them in and then hold them accountable is a thing. I think actually that you can look at where you are in this country and see how your vote will be counted or not. And I think it's time to really start voting with common sense and to vote for common sense. So in counties and states where there has been an extreme suppression of Black votes, I think we can mobilize and organize around other forms of local government. I think Bronwyn said, these local elections are very important to the day-to-day activities of our country, and not so sort of like reprehensibly rhetorically political and harmful as national or federal elections. But then in terms of federal elections too, I think we have to like really, put our money where our mouth is as Americans and decentralize, divest, and like there are militias being formed, right? I mean, I don't want to, whatever. I'm just saying, I don't feel like I'm not going to say put pressure on anyone who doesn't know from a kind of common sense historical background that their vote will be counted. And I think as white property owning people, you definitely have an entitled sense of that. But, for people of color and for people who are in marginal positions or in positions of precarity in this democracy, I don't think vote or die is a mantra that anyone needs to live by anymore. Instead, I think it's more strategically vote locally. And I think also something that I was walking down the street the other day and someone had tagged Black will on the ground, and it really stuck with me. But this idea of a Black will, like a will to govern yourselves, and a will to govern oneself, a will towards a sort of relational freedom, I think is one that we can all, take some sort of optimistic hope in. There's a lot of other work than political propagandistic work. There's social work, there are various kinds of market reform work, there's civic reform work that can be instigated. So this rhetoric of vote or die, or the rhetoric of sort of like your vote, can change the world. I think we can actually sort of calm down a bit on that and look at where anti-Blackness has been seated in our country and sort of like, divest from those voting booths. I think we can also put more work into other kinds of governance, other kinds of divestments, other kinds of mobilization of let's say like kinds of courts or kinds of democratic like bodies and entities and organizations that will push the social boundaries in this country. I think we have like an affectively governed country. We don't have laws that necessarily logistically automate around certain bodies, and I think that in and of itself, like let's call it injustice as like the smallest possible word. This country's violent delights like tend to meet violent ends, and I think that we should I don't know, in terms of voting right now, I feel like we should be a bit more strategic and sort of understanding that the system is collapsing also, and using that collapse to address holes, persistent and relevant, with all kinds of work, all kinds of organizing work. I think the word political means literally just of some sort of social organization. So in that regard, it's homeschooling parents, it's our elderly, it's our essential workers, like there are, we're kind of putting together a reader right now for Cassandra on slave revolts, but I think we've seen moments like Occupy, Black Lives Matter. These are sort of courts of public opinion that are activated by a lot of systems that we use daily, and I think we have a power and an urgency and an agency in those systems to change the affective sentiment that governs how our laws are enforced. And I think that's a place maybe to start. This place where we have to start is, it doesn't matter what laws we have around election if they're enforced by white supremacist dictators. So I don't know. In that way, I'm just saying don't vote or die. Live and prosper and be strategic. And I don't know. That's all I got. I love questions if you guys have.
Yeah, thanks, Kandis. I don't see any questions. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. I definitely would like to, I guess, include everybody's voice in here if, they're able to. But in the meantime, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about Cassandra Press and the readers and kind of how you see the role of Cassandra and all the work that you're doing with that, especially now. And maybe if you could also address, in the past few months, I know there's been a lot of more interest in Cassandra and, what that kind of means for you. And if you think that might be a reflection, of something else. And yeah, just what you might have to say about that.
Yeah, well, Cassandra, over the summer, we started doing classrooms, which was really great. So we branched out into doing actual classrooms. Our first teachers were Manuela Brew and Rhea Dillon, and Ebony Haynes actually hosts a session for Black students only. I taught a class called Whiteness, Dissonance, and Horror. And yeah, I think so in response to how Cassandra's changed, I think COVID presented a couple changes, dramatic changes. For instance, the store wasn't active online. We didn't have an online store until about May. And so that's been a big thing, having the PDFs be available. I'm such a print person and a paper person. I feel like it was a little bit difficult to enter the digital, but there it was. And and I think also the George Floyd murder Breonna Taylor, the uprising in between, definitely sparked, for better or worse, a superficial, both a superficial and a really, intense and welcomed, look at Black projects and Black creative space, Black intellectual space. And so I do think that, while it is, it's my work for sure, there's a lot of the new aspects of Cassandra in response, to the contemporary, to this moment that started this summer. I've wanted to do classrooms for a really long time, actually. We had an opening in January, Printed Matter, that I was excited to also roll out classrooms for. And it just sort of logistically, I think, came together a little bit more with the added necessity with Zoom, literally. I mean, just this virtual social that opened up during COVID. And I'm excited also about the classrooms extending into a couple other print projects. We're now a 501c3, so we've got nonprofit status. And that's really nice. It's been great. We're looking forward to kind of rolling out some fundraisers throughout the fall, and for winter classes to open up. We're going to do, again, all Black instructors, and classes that hopefully keep deepening this sort of language and a kind of public language as well around aesthetics and ethics and how to sort of fuse them. I think I feel like a lot of the work of Cassandra that is relevant to this conversation is that I've been thinking a lot about representation and its sort of fallacies post-Reconstruction, especially for Black bodies, and thinking about life and non-life and how those registers are visual or are materialized around the visual in the visual. I think thinking through just those representations, the classes have been great, kind of new content and new dynamic space. And then the readers that we're going to start doing, and we're definitely doing more original publications, which has been really amazing. So there's a lot of research being done right now and a lot of development of some projects that I'm super excited about. The kids imprint being the most exciting, and the classrooms. So with the kids imprint, we're trying to sort of research and develop a way that we can address, especially the punitive disparities in Black children in the educational system. So we're producing materials for K through 12 graders, and really thinking about what Black parents need at home to get through COVID, but then what they've also needed at home in terms of, re-education, just understanding sort of the carceral state and how the carceral state impacts all of our education and upbringing as Black citizens. And so, yeah, we're really looking forward to launching that sometime in the spring. And more classrooms coming through in the fall as well. And a couple other projects for sure that are also thinking about Blackness. We're launching soon, very soon, probably in the next week or so, an encyclopedia of Blackness and abstraction. So that's 3 volumes and over 100 texts of. The first volume is Blackness and the Image, the second volume is Blackness and the Archive, and the third volume is Blackness and Annexation. So thinking also through representation and its fallacies post-Reconstruction, and especially how Black bodies and Blackness is sort of used so fluidly to construct and deconstruct democracy and democratic. I mean, so many different things. It's really annexed out for, the highest bidder often. But then also thinking about images. What is the Black image? What is an image of what is the subject in terms of photography, and how has the Black subject been formed? And how is it formed in relation to the image? And then also, the archive, like a collection of images, the sampling of images, which then, calls into reference this private acquisition or private sort of material of, again, the subject and photographer, and then sort of archive. So how things are stored, kept, preserved, which images are owned or have provenance from what places, and how they intersect with larger questions of what it is to be Black, a Black diasporic subject. So there's it's almost too much to talk about with Cassandra. But there always has been. So that's also nice, because it feels like, I don't know, it's both really hectic. I'm also kind of resting right now in it. We've done 4 years of a lot of research that I think is on the tip of people's tongues right now. 2 volumes on fetishism, a 5-volume reader on misogynoir. Fawcett's is on the school to prison pipeline. A reader on the white savior complex. We've done just so many sort of, I think, key-wordy almost, sort of investigations or kind of investigations or readers around things that are being talked about right now.
Exactly. And I think there's a question in the chat, I guess, that relates to that. Are there any, with all of the readers that you have, John, and, the fact that they are becoming so prescient now, especially, is there any reading in particular or any text that's, really sticking with you right now that you keep turning back to?
Wow, that's a crazy question. I'm doing so much research right now. There's a lot. I'm reading a lot about convict leasing. There's a book on the St. James River and the chiefdoms around the St. James River. So that's one thing that's kind of I've been turning around in my head, is the kind of treaties around the treaties that traded African labor between indigenous and European settler, indigenous early Americans and European settlers. So thinking, about that patch of land around the James River, it still has over 13 correctional facilities, and the chiefdoms there were African slave owning. Just thinking through a bit of that stuff. There's a couple, I'm just reading about a slave revolt in the Navajo country in 1842, where I think something like 40 slaves escaped from Navajo territory. They were slaves of the Navajo, and they were hunted down by the Cree and the Navajo and returned to that space. There's also this book on the Columbian Exchange, thinking a lot about that, just sort of where pre-Silk Road even, spices and plants and fruits kind of originated in Asia and Africa and the Middle East, and how they arrived to Europe to then arrive in the New World. And then this Intimacy of Four Continents is a book that my friend and co-researcher Clara Lee recommended about 1.5 years ago. That just sort of thinks through the replacement of African, indigenous, Asian, South American laborers in Europe and the New World, and how empire is kind of constructed through those sort of fault lines. Who's seen interacting with whom, which proximities sort of matter to the production of culture, which ones are sort of forgotten or buried thinking a lot about like root systems as well. I was reading a book about Joshua Tree and how Joshua Tree was underwater in the Jurassic period, I guess. So a lot of those plants have weird flowers. Those succulents have weird flowers because they're actually like old plants that have been absorbed into the root systems of these succulents. And flower, so presentation, what is above is so below. That's been sticking to me. I don't know. I've been reading a lot of stuff. There's a book called One Dies, Get Another. It's a convict, on the story of convict leasing, so on the sort of formation of the contracts between the state and this like states and different private prison organizations. I think that's been really on my mind a lot, especially with the call to defund. That's just work that feels like so necessary, and I'm disappointed by the Biden-Harris ticket because of how obviously pro-incarceration this ticket is, and how extremely just how much that feels like the root of so many problems right now. Early convict leasing. I mean, there's still the case where you can kind of negotiate with the state if you have a state laboring contract. Serving time in jail. So there's just ways where there, so many different kinds of state bureaucratic organization are hinged on private monies from essentially from prison labor. So definitely reading a lot of that and seeing sort of the birth of that in Richmond, Virginia in the 1860s, and how that kind of like the American South, is this planter's block that Clyde Woods talks about, and the reorganization around white supremacy and the explicit sort of Anglo-American identity that is rooted from Reconstruction, and how it's become just sort of, in so many ways globally out of control, like this out of control white supremacist sort of urge to control or dominate or exploit any and everything, I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, but it's all kind of splattered. Oh, we have a plant migration zine coming out too. That's going to be kind of nice. Like we kind of showcase different plants and gave their sort of like their origin stories and how they've been. Plants are often like cultivated in very different ways than they grow. So a lot of like indigenous fruit-bearing plants or crops were cultivated to have non-seed bearing fruit or not fruit anymore in cultivation in European soil or in American soil. There's just a lot of different kinds of, it's just a very super interesting, that kind of living resource that plants represent, and how they have to be tended for, they have to be cared for. So there's also, a very explicit link there to forced laborers always, whether it's botanical gardens or state farms.
Yeah, exactly. And it sounds like also we're going to see a lot of that in your 2 upcoming exhibitions. There will be a lot of reference. I think there's a question in the chat, about images. That, as I think you mentioned earlier, just because of the timing of the exhibition, Kandis can't share any images at this moment. But in a couple of weeks, everybody will be able to see what she's been up to. And then, this question about strategy. So I think I wanted to kind of build this in too. So when we're talking about, all of the issues of white supremacism that's been, built into, what the system looks like now, I guess as far as, some maybe further concrete steps, what would you, I guess, think of as, kind of an active strategy? And I'm also thinking about, on your Instagram stories, you mentioned, I think, in an article recently also how you turned, it's kind of another form of your practice in some way of sort of like collaging all these TikToks and other social media activity together to kind of create, your own narrative of what's been going on. So, so I guess what would you think about, moving forward?
Moving forward, I'm going to start a TikTok Finsta. Check it out. No, I don't know really with every day I feel like Instagram TikTok was prompting me to kill. So I'm going to look back on that at some point and be like, what was that narrative? But I do think it's a dialectical thing in a basic way. It's like dialectical and dialogic. It's just like, it becomes like TikTok felt more dialogic than other forms of like kind of like chatter, back and forth chatter apps or whatever. And
every day I feel like Instagram.
And so I think also Instagram feels more one-dimensional now post TikTok. Does that answer anything? No. Yeah, I think what kind of happened was that around the outbreak, or not outbreak, God, the pandemic, the start of the pandemic, the outbreak of the pandemic, I guess it was, March or so, it just sort of started feeling like a lot of the stuff from the last 4 years of research and the last 4 years of readers and I think it's just that thing where like my phone is like listening. My phone's listening to all my conversations, and my phone also like knows all the titles of the readers. And so like shit pops off, and I've been following the hashtag slavery is a choice or something since like Kanye said that dumb shit like a long time ago. And so like, when random things pop off, I have like a really easy kind of dialectical base of stuff, like from my like algorithmic presence. And then so what was kind of happening was that it was making more and more sense, like because I was getting sent or almost like delivered things that corresponded so much to my research that they illustrate my research. And it happened super organically that like the more I posted, like the more connections I made, the more connections returned to me. And then the more like the height, like the pitch of that connection got like, I don't know how to describe it, but the pitch of those connections gets at times and around certain contexts, like, it's like, it's not just like Pong, it's like dialogic or something. And I really like that. What I really like about TikTok is that so many people are doing things that are essentially like PowerPoints and readers. I mean, PowerPoints, readers, and performances that feels like, again, one of those things where it's so similar to, not so similar to how I think, but I think there's a kernel of production or something like that was like where I fell into a really gentle but like really hectic, deep sucking meme whirlpool. And like, yeah, I don't know. Just it's interesting. I really like the idea of like opening up more archival work to the general public because of how dialogic platforms like TikTok were, and then I'll say were because since May I think it's been pretty terrible. But yeah. Sorry.
Nope, that makes sense. That certainly makes sense. I know you're super interested in the carceral state right now as an issue. I mean, I guess as far as voting, I mean, on the local level, I mean, are there any, I guess, either kind of candidates or like any positions in particular that you're really looking at, to have people get activated to fill those, or where you think that a difference can really be made?
I think a difference can really be made always in language, and like the generation of language that poses like better propositions and like deeper understanding. Like I feel like we have so many. I mean, we just speak in logical fallacies. We speak in like this, the idea of being spoken to in order to be convinced of something is like dominant in America anyway. And then like in these campaigning kind of like, these campaign months and the kind of, the language I think is where I feel like is the most important production. And then supporting Black businesses, supporting Black and Black-owned, femme-owned businesses, supporting businesses from people who don't fit, and not just the businesses, but the lives of people who don't fit into the white supremacist, like Anglo empirical value scale is like of paramount importance right now. Supporting, I think, peoples who have done it different, for like a long time, and really reasserting that there are other truths, that there are like truths that can be non-dominant, but also like, reparatively circulated or something. I think about Winona LaDuke's New Green Deal and her propositions and how they kind of get whitewashed and swept up into, Bernie's whatever eco thing. But, we can learn so much from each other. And I think there's that kind of rhetorical propagandistic language that requires us to vote in as basically a monoparty system that then forecloses on a lot of the ways that we can suggest resistance, So I would just think about what governance is, again, to ourselves, to where we are, to who we are, what does actually govern us, and what, our laws are so irrationally, well, not irrationally, they're enforced with the harshest and most violent anti-Blackness, the world's ever seen. So I don't know what to say in terms of how we can, there's an overall, I think, just supporting people who are alive and doing this work, and people like Dignity and Power Now, abolitionist work, supporting people who aren't protected by the enforced law is paramount to any kind of fascist uprising or overthrow. And so locales, I guess, locales, teachers, mothers, people on a local level who are going to be protecting others and sheltering others and enabling others and aiding others and creating new forms of value, people who are creating new markets, people who are creating new forms of value, people who are evading old forms of value. I think those are the places to put work. I don't know, we can do another full docket on Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, or we could put a lot of work into people we can touch, things we can talk to, things we can change and shape, and the people and places who are doing that, because at the end of the day, I think we will have who we can hug, or at some point, or that's maybe where to start or something, or where to really, or that's for me, that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, especially I feel like everything especially with Cassandra and the, having the kids imprint also, I think, getting, people at at a younger age, thinking about these, all of these issues and, being able to develop their own opinion about it. I think will kind of, spur that, I guess, ethos, moving forward. And then there's another question in the chat. Let's see. So there's a question about what are your thoughts around Black nationalism, and how do you think art can be a tool for creating spaces of safety and protection for Black people that are not yet but could be?
Oh, damn. Black nationalism feels funny. I don't know what that means together. I guess you mean like new Black militias. I think that's bomb as fuck. I feel like every, I don't know. It's getting to that point where it's I wish I could shoot a bow and arrow or some shit like that. I mean, but that is also, that's this country, you also I think in terms of not being in that binary, if you don't want to be in a violent ass existence, you don't have to be here. People can leave. I do think even at the lowest, and it's not just a question of privilege, and then it's a question of agency up and down. Is countries don't function if people leave them, and that is what war does to many countries, is cause people to migrate. So I don't know, I feel especially with being mistreated and abused for so long, I'm thinking so much about other contexts of Black life around the world a lot myself, thinking about kind of I'm a Afro-Caribbean person, so thinking about the Afro-Caribbean context, thinking about different African contexts and even Afro-European contexts, and just sort of what we can learn from how other countries, how other people fight this same battle, this sort of civil rights to national identity, and just really, wanting that conversation to be open and broader. I think there's just so much more conversation, honestly, and that's really
There's a lot to say there. And yes, somebody in the comments has a bow and arrow for you to borrow. So
I mean, Black nationalism, yeah. And then art, in terms of art, being able to construct spaces for Black people. I have been thinking a lot about how abstraction works, and this is like a part of that encyclopedia. There is, like at the beginning of COVID, I asked a couple of people together to sort of talk through how we could envision some initiatives around a reparative logic of primitivism. And primitivism is, I think, what is at the heart of that question of like where Black people can be safe in art space. For me, like thinking through how, Picasso takes up the Dan, or how the tribal is taken up through white Western romanticism, whatever, and then into, the modern. There's so much there. There's so much there, and there's so much there that we can I think feel a lot of agency and also feel, quite trapped, right? I think art is it's a gift and a curse really with Blackness in this, right now, this kind of Black's bodies in this crosshairs between these varying forms of abstraction. I think there's so much agency, there's just so much agency in Black, in aestheticism, I think there's just, we generate so much of the languages that the affective language of this country is generated by the Black experience. So in that way, we are the nexus of so many arts organizations, whether they are Black owned, run, or operated or not. I've never been anywhere in the world where people don't know who Aretha Franklin is. I've been a lot of places in the world where people don't know who the American president is, what they're doing. So in that way, we are whether we're in a gallery space or on the street. I think there's an amplification inherent to the Black populist voice. Because it is also the kind of the entertaining class of the entire world. And so there's so much power there that doesn't need any space. And I think, so thinking about how to monetize that and thinking about how to weaponize that and thinking about how to spatialize that and then really interrogate that is for me at the forefront, that power inherent in what can so often be very harmful abstraction of the Black body. So yeah, thinking about, how do Black cultural creators now inherit, 100 years of more of extreme primitivist predatory markets, and how do we confront that, and then also place Black subjectivity not more firmly in binaries.
That's what I think is how.
So I think it looks like we're going to have to wrap it up in the next minute or two. I guess, do you have anything else, Kandis, that you'd like to add? Or
that's good.
Thank you so much for your time here. I always love, listening to everything you have to say, and just, every project you're working on, and, everything else going on. It's always, I always feel like, we walk away, so many things to think about afterwards, and it's a lifetime of work, that is for sure. So, thank you from everybody at Artists for Democracy. We really appreciate your time, and I will now hand it on to Deborah.
Thanks, you guys. Have a good day, everyone. And trust yourselves, I guess is the end thing. Trust yourselves, do what you're doing, keep going. Bye.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Kandis. That was great. And I'm just going to tell you guys a couple quick things. Voting has already started in some states. And so for people that want to vote by mail, depending on where you live, you might already be able to. In LA County, you can vote by mail starting on October 5th. The early voting, or not early voting, but the long-term vote centers that are open for 11 days, open on October 24th, and then voting at all vote centers, and anybody in LA County can vote anywhere they want at any vote center Those open on October 30th, and you can vote October 30th until November 3rd. If you're online by 8 p.m., they have to let you vote no matter how late it gets. So so look around. If there's a line at a vote center you want to go to, you can go to a different one. And now let's watch the debate. We're recommending that you watch on PBS, but we're putting a link in the chat. You can. What the joke was, it's actually going to be harder to not watch it than to watch it because every channel will be covering it. And hope to see you guys next week.